I want to talk about a big question in this video, and it's something that I've been thinking about for a while and trying to think about how I can put it into words. Uh, Back in the 70s, when I was in college and graduate school, one of the historians whose work I really liked was a guy named R.R. Palmer. Now, he was no relationship to me, no even remote connection. That wasn't why I enjoyed reading his work. He wrote very well. He ended up at Yale. He had taught at Princeton. I forget where else he was at one time or another. And I think the best book that I remember reading, and anybody who took anything on the French Revolution or early modern Europe probably read it, 12 Who Ruled, when the 12 people in the historical figures in the French Revolution. But there were some other books that also fascinated me, because at the time, today we have this Atlantic World Study, but at the time he was writing this, nobody was doing this kind of stuff. And he looked at initially the American Revolution and the French Revolution as phenomena that took place in the Atlantic Basin. And later on, he broadened that to a 2-volume study where he went all the way around the Atlantic Basin. Because if you look at the late 18th and early 19th centuries, it wasn't just the United States that had a revolution. It wasn't just France that had a revolution. There were revolutions all through Central America, all through South America, where the Spanish and the Portuguese were driven out, except for the small islands where they could hang on. You had a massive revolution, brutal revolution in what's now Haiti during this period. And then, of course, you had a revolution in Ireland, which wasn't successful. You had the French Revolution and counter-revolutions and other revolutions in France. You had revolutions in Spain. You had political instability spread throughout Central Europe. You even had in the 1820s in faraway Russia, the Decembrist revolt, which you could put into the same movement of ideas around the Atlantic Basin. And that's what he was talking about, how the things that were happening in the United States weren't just happening there, they were happening all around. That ideas were floating around the basin because they were being transmitted through pamphlets and books. They didn't have internet and TV and radio and satellite communications in those days, but things still did move around. I mean, people in the American colonies knew what was being written about and said over in Europe. And I mean, Jefferson's the perfect example of that. And what he saw were there were two forces at work. There were the elites, in those days, the aristocrats, who, for the most part, controlled things. They had given up some areas control, but they still controlled mostly everything else. And they were resistant to give up any more. And then you had these new forces that had been unleashed by the Enlightenment, epitomized by the patriots in the American Revolution or by the French in the French Revolution, various different factions with different sets of ideas, to be sure. But they were trying to wrest power from these elites. And of course, the story is, once you bottle it down, it's not his main point, but what you can draw from this, and what seemed clear to me, was that as this environment developed, the elites did not want to give up power. And the only place they did, to a degree, was in Britain, where that's how they held on to power, was to give up some of it. But in places like France, they didn't want to give up anything. And, same with the British here. I mean, there's this reluctance to yield power. So that what you ultimately end up with, and again, this wasn't his main point, but the point you could certainly draw from his books that I drew at the time was the only way you could get rid of entrenched elites was through armed revolt. I mean, that's how we got rid of the British. I mean, we tried reasoning with them. We tried sending them, messages and pamphlets and petitions and pleas, and we begged. None of it worked. George III just, threw them all in a trash can, and trash can said we were rebels, and, that was it. There was a rebellion on. And you had the American Revolution, 8 years. And I think about all this, and I can't help, as a historian and having been schooled in all this stuff, when I look around the world today, see a similar pattern develop around the Atlantic Basin. You have, I mean, let's look around the Atlantic Basin today. You have, the Trump election in 2016, what I think is part of this. You had Brexit over in the UK even before that. You have Wexit out now in Western Canada, where they're having problems. It used to be just, it was mostly Quebec. Now it's the West. They also have issues there trying to balance off these sectional differences. Mexico is, it's going down the shithole. I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago, the army was defeated by a security force of one of the cartels. You got like 40 to 50,000 people being killed a year in Mexico. South America, I mean, you got Venezuela. Now Chile's a mess. Brazil's a mess. It's spreading down there. Central America's already a mess. And again, you've got in France, you had a little bit of Frexit. You had the yellow vests. You got the Catalonians, went independence in Spain. Again, Brexit in the UK, all kinds of things going on elsewhere. But if you look around the Atlantic Basin, West Africa a couple of years ago, Liberia and places around there, we had outright civil wars going on. I mean, there's clearly something percolating all the way around the Western Basin. To me, there's no doubt that it's happening, and it's all interrelated. I mean, some of the ideas from Brexit you'll see popping up here or there, and everybody's learning from another. These are the days of the internet, and they all learn. I mean, you have people in Hong Kong learning how to do things from what was going on in Catalonia, and they're all changing, sharing information, sharing lessons learned, what works, what didn't work, what ended up this way, what ended up that way, and you can see all this stuff percolating. And it doesn't seem to be going away. I mean, it seems like, they're trying to get rid of Donald Trump here, and they're holding off on Brexit. But now it's this Wexit thing in Canada that I've been watching, and you've got stuff going on in other European countries. So in Hong Kong, it's not the Atlantic Basin, but things are going on out there. I mean, it looks like the whole world. I mean, you look at the Arab world, which isn't the Atlantic Basin. I mean, Yemen's a mess, Libya's a mess, Algeria's going downhill, Tunisia's a mess, Lebanon's a mess, Syria's a mess, Iraq's a mess, Iran's under pressure. I mean, all this stuff is percolating. And when I go back and I look at what I read when I read R.R. Palmer, if you look at this as it's often portrayed, and I think correctly, as the elites, want to determine what goes on, what decisions are made, what policies are followed, and the people aren't happy with that. This is the situation you had in the period that R.R. Palmer was writing about, and it ended in, for the most part, armed revolution. Now, we can see that, in just the other day with ex-CIA chief who tweeted, what a wonderful thing the American Republic is, that we have all these bureaucrats in the State Department and the CIA who are going to preserve American democracy. Think about that for a second. What is democracy? It's like the people voting. So the people vote for Donald Trump, but these bureaucrats are going to save us from our own vote, from our own electoral system. That's not how the electoral system is supposed to work. They're supposed to be the people who do the job of the president who's elected by the people. I mean, you don't like what the president's doing, quit. Don't, leak, spy, try to undercut him. I mean, this is. And these people are applauded on the left today, but it's a symbol of the elites not wanting to give up. They can't believe that they lost. It's the same with Brexit. They can't believe that they lost. Don't they understand what a wonderful thing the European Union is? And the problem is the European Union is increasingly losing control. That's why these right-wing parties are popping up in places like Germany. And don't get me wrong, this is a terrible thing. When you see right-wing parties develop in Germany, you need to get worried. But why are they developing? They're developing because the main parties just keep pushing the elite policies. Well, we're going to bring all these people in. Everything's going to be fine. Nothing to worry about. It's not going to be an increase in crime. They're all going to, turn into good German citizens, and they're all going to learn German and love German culture. And it's not happening. And the more they bring in, the worse things get. And the people can see that. They see it in, stories. They see it on the street. They feel it. They see it when they see Jews getting beaten up in Berlin or someplace else by, enraged Muslims and people running into churches yelling Allahu Akbar with knives. I mean, they see all this stuff. And then they look at the elites who control not just the government, but the parties for the most part. And they say, what are you doing about it? And their answer is nothing. We're just going to keep doing the same thing. But it'll get better. Just trust us. Well, they don't trust us. And when they don't get an answer from these people, what they do is they go out and they start forming these right-wing parties, or they turn to the right-wing parties because they're the ones who said, we'll do something about it. We will stop this. And when the other German parties, the main political parties, are saying, well, no, we're not going to stop it, people who want it stopped are going to turn to the other parties. I mean, that's, how did Hitler come into being? How did the Nazis get to be not the majority party in Germany, but such a big party? There was a depression. We all know the story. There was a depression. All these people were out of work. Well, that's half the story. What's the other half of the story is the main political parties, the existing political parties in Germany, the Social Democrats, the communists, the religious parties, the other right-wing parties. What was their answer to the depression? Other than the communists had one, we'll overthrow the government and set up a Bolshevik dictatorship of the proletariat. But other than that, what were the Social Democrats doing? So, it's very interesting. We're all familiar with the movie, most people are, Cabaret. And in Cabaret, you have this story developing where you see the Nazis starting to pop up. And eventually, at the last scene, they're like in the place. And people are getting beat up and they're singing these patriotic songs and all that. And this is terrible. This is like, students, I would talk about students with say, well, what do you see here? Well, you're a rising Nazis, blah, 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 blah. They said, all right, well, why were the Nazis rising? Well, unemployment. Who had an answer for unemployment? Who said they'd do something about unemployment? The Nazis. Elect us. We'll end this. This will be over. What are the other parties doing? What are the other politicians doing? What are the elites doing in Germany during the Weimar Republic? When everything's going to hell and all these people are out of work, they're hanging out in the cabaret. They're having a drink, doing some drugs, getting laid, singing, dancing, having a grand old time. Meanwhile, the Nazis are out working the streets, telling people to vote for us, and we'll end the Great Depression. Now, my argument isn't that that was a good thing. It was obviously a terrible thing, and it led to even more horrible, terrible things. But it happened because the elites, in the face of an issue, didn't know what to do about it. They didn't know what to do. Now, there are people on the left today also, just like the Bolsheviks in Germany, know what they want to do. They want to bring down the republic and put in a socialist government. And you can see that with that's why they're popular on the left, because at least they're saying something that we can do something about this. But if other people don't say something about what they can do to change the situation, when elite policies are shown to not work, then you're going to get things, if you're lucky, you're going to get Donald Trump. If you're unlucky, you're going to get, neo-Nazis. And now I know some people would equate that here, but we've got a long way to go from Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. And if you don't understand that, you're a moron. I'm sorry. I'm not. It's just not worth arguing. But that's the situation we're in. Yes, we have issues. Yes, we need some new ideas. The guy, I can't think of his name right now. It escapes me. But he read an article the other day, and he said, just look at the last 30 years. Think of anything the elites have done that's worked in the last 30 years. Think of a policy that came out of Washington or out of a think tank or an elite thing that's been successful. Whether it's, the war on poverty, the war on drugs, the wars overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq. One thing that the elites have done that's proved successful. And, he can't come up with any examples. He come up with plenty of examples of things that didn't go the way they were supposed to. Obamacare didn't go the way it was supposed to, or rap didn't go the way it was supposed to. But these are all the ideas that the best and the brightest have given us. And that's the old David Halberstam book. The best and the brightest was about how we got into the Vietnam War, which was a debacle. And the people who drove us there, the people who steered the bus into the debacle over the side of a cliff, were this country's best and the brightest. The people from Harvard, the people from Yale. And when you say anything against them, oh, you're anti-intelligentsia, anti-intellectual, but it's the truth. I mean, I had to read that book when I was in school. I had to live through that period. And it's the same today. You see these guys and everything gets screwed up in the government or the bureaucracy somewhere. Doesn't matter what party they're from. And it's like, well, he's a Harvard Law graduate, or he's a Yale history graduate, or he's from some Ivy League school. He went to Stanford. He went here. He went there. These are the elites. And they take care of each other. They let their sons and their daughters get, into the schools that they went to. And they do all this stuff, and they take care of themselves, and they give each other jobs. And Joe Biden's son gets thrown out of the military for drugs, and he's signing these multi-billion-dollar deals with the Chinese. I mean, it just happens. He's the vice president's son. I'm sure there's no connection. I know when when I became chair of the history department, everybody wanted to hire my son. But this is the crap that's going on, and people are getting fed up with it. And the fear, I keep arguing we're headed for a civil war. When I first made that argument, a third of the people in the country in a poll said they thought we were. Now it's 2/3. Just in a couple of years, it's doubled from 1/3 to 2/3. 2/3 means most of the people in this country now think like me and think we're drifting toward a civil war. And it's not just I can give you all the reasons for that. I think I did that in another video. But it's this R.R. Palmer concept of the Atlantic Basin that also is pushing this. But I see that when this happened before, when you saw these kind of ideas popping up all around the Atlantic Basin, what we ended up with, if you drew a map of the world and you put little flaming signs wherever you had revolutions, France, the United States, Mexico, you'd have this basin inflamed by political revolt, armed, often violent political revolt. And that's the danger we're facing today. And I don't see anybody in the media, not just the mainstream media. I can watch Fox News. I don't know who's talking about it there. There's nobody very few people. Occasionally you'll see somebody sort of stumble into something about the Anglosphere or, the Brits and the Australians. But I mean, I think it's bigger than that. It's not, limited to the Anglosphere. It includes other people too. And I don't think we have much of an idea about, what's really going on out there, because the mainstream media, most of the media, is part of the elite. They're part of the structure that has to go. They're part of a structure that's supporting. They're all supporting each other. They're all in the game together. And they're not going to tell you. They're not going to let you know what's going on around the world. They're going to try to cover that up and make it all look like these are isolated events. That what goes on in Canada has nothing to do with what's going on here, nothing to do with what's going on in the UK, nothing to do with what's going on in Mexico or Chile or anywhere else in the world. But it all is related somehow. That's what R.R. Palmer was trying to get to. That ideas do flow, and there's an impact. You can't look at the French Revolution and the American Revolution in isolation. I mean, the American Revolution helped stimulate the French Revolution. It's not to say without the American Revolution there wouldn't have been a French Revolution, but there's no doubt. I mean, early on, one of the main figures in the French Revolution was Lafayette, who had been the main figure, in our revolution. But it's clear that things are moving back and forth. And of course, after the French Revolution, some of those ideas filter back over into the United States and influence our politics. So all this is happening around the world, and people aren't talking about it. And I think it's scary. I mean, we should be scared because, like I said, if you drew that map of the Atlantic Basin, you started, putting little check marks or flash signs wherever you had political problems today, it would look much bigger than I think we understand that it is from parochial news that we see just here. I mean, I've been following this thing on Facebook from the Wexit up in Western Canada, which is interesting in and of itself. But I don't think most Americans even know what's going on up there. I mean, they have no idea. The idea, problems with oil and pipelines and everything. When I teach a course in the U.S. and the Middle East, usually the first day when I was teaching face to face, I'd say, where do we get our oil from? Saudi Arabia, or Persian Gulf. No, I never. I'd have like 70 students in my class. Nobody knew the number one oil exporter of the United States was Canada. They didn't even know Canada had oil. So you ever hear of the Edmonton Oilers? Oh yeah, that's right. They got a hockey team. Yeah, I guess that must be it. I mean, they don't have a clue. So that's part of the problem today is people don't understand what's happening. But the more ideas move around, and they will, because mainstream media doesn't control the news anymore. It's not just it's Fox News, it's the blog. There's 85,000 blogs or something, 850,000 blogs. I forget what the number is. This is an enormous amount of stuff percolating and being exchanged out there and on the internet and social media. And these ideas are all going to move around. And you're going to see more and more of us. And it is getting dangerous because the elites are just they don't see that they don't think they're the elites. They think that they just know best, but that's what they are. And they don't want to give up their control. They don't want to give up their power. And the last time we faced this situation, what you ended up with is this whole series of violent revolutions around the Atlantic Basin. I hope we don't get there again. I'm not advocating that, but I mean, this is the reality that people are living in. They don't have a clue.